Our final panel is titled The Future of News and Media and will be moderated by author and contributor to The New Yorker, Ken Auletta. There will be time during the program for you to participate. Your questions are a welcome part of the dialogue. I also want to once again thank Mickey Strauss and Ellen Chesler for organizing this wonderful series of panels. Did a wonderful job. And also, of course, to our lead sponsor, the Tar family, and all of the co-sponsors. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you. Now, may I present Ken Auletta and his distinguished panel. Thank you.
Nice to see you not at the beach today. I can't believe it's such a beautiful day. Craig Newmark likes to call himself the customer service representative of Craigslist. He's also, I might add, the founder of Craigslist. If you talk to some people in the newspaper business, they think he's the devil incarnate for stealing 1/3 of their revenue, which came from classified advertising. But you know it's a free service, it's beloved service, and he's an important figure, has some thoughts on journalism and media. Jeff Zucker at 26 was the executive director of the Today Show, which since he took over then, and before he moved on to become head of entertainment and executive producer of Tom Brokaw, and now the CEO of NBC Universal. That Today Show is still in first place in all those consecutive weeks. It's a very different looking show than it was when he was the executive director. But welcome, gentlemen. The conversation today is about the future of news and media. And let me begin with a question to both of you, which is, in the digital world, which is taking over so much of our lives, what is the digital threat you most worry about, Craig, the digital competitor?
Well, we don't think much about competition. And I should say that I do customer service for a living. I'm not the boss of it, and that biases my view towards everything. I view everything from the grassroots up. Given that, and also I have the advantage of talking to a lot of people about news and media. My view is very partial, but I can listen to people who really know stuff, who give me the advantage of what they really know. In some cases, I'll even pretend to listen to Ken. But the idea is that I do see great hope for optimism, particularly among people under 30, the millennials, who are using social media like Facebook and Twitter to try to figure out, in terms of what people are being told, what can be trusted and what might be viewed with some suspicion. I also see a lot of people online in places like Twitter or Facebook who are curating the news.
Craig, let me ask you, what is the threat you worry about?
The threat I worry about to that optimistic take, is that there are people who are really good at disinforming the public, people who are really good at framing a question and then basically running what amounts to a scam on the public, for example, where the president was born. That's a pretty scary threat. That kind of thing is picked up, particularly with November coming. It's happening to a lot of big, very trusted organizations, and we're talking.
What's the digital threat you worry most about?
So I'd say I look at it on two levels. As a business person, I worry about the economics of the digital world, especially with regard to journalism and news coverage. You know, it's expensive to cover the news, and you know, it's cheap to be first, and it's expensive to be right. And credibility matters in journalism. And unfortunately, there's no real such thing as journalism jail. So as a result, you know, anybody can be a journalist in a digital world. You know, just because you're a blogger doesn't mean you're a journalist. And just because you blog doesn't mean that, you know, you have credibility. On the other hand, we're all looking for what's the truth. And I think that's something that I worry a lot about. So as a business person, I worry about the economics of it. And on the journalist side, I worry about the credibility of it.
You both actually touched on that same theme about trust, and you, in fact, have used the phrase, I think, trust is the new black, isn't it?
Yeah, this is an attempt at wit on my part.
But it's an engineer,
yes,
you can tell, right?
That's actually exactly right. And I'm a full nerd, and that's the deal there. But the idea is that we're all looking, our lives revolve around who we trust, our friends or maybe friends of friends. We rely on that for dry cleaner recommendations. We rely on that for what's going on in politics. The idea is that journalism is required for a democracy to survive. My new attempt at wit, which dates only from last week, is referring to the role of the press, but also an emerging network of fact-checkers as the immune system of democracy. The deal is we all got to pitch in when some bad information gets out there. We need to work together to deal with it.
Yeah, but the problem in this day and age in the digital society is that when a bad piece of information gets out there, no matter how many fact-checkers are out there, it's out there. And I think that's the real thing that we have to contend with, and that is so different today than it was even 5 years ago. And it's great that everybody is a citizen journalist and everybody can express their point of view and everybody can be some form of journalist, but it's the credibility that does matter. It's the trust. I completely agree with you. And the problem is that today a half-truth or a zero-truth spreads around the world in seconds and does not come off. And it's just, you know, it's why credibility matters, and it's why you have to trust, you have to know who you're reading or listening to, and trust matters.
But how does that affect you? I mean, here you are, the CEO of a major media company. Does that affect the way you behave, what you just said?
Well, I mean, you know, there's two ways to answer. I mean, there's a personal level and there's a professional level. You asked as the CEO. Yeah, so professionally, it does, because you know, we have tremendous news organizations in our company. You know, we have broadcast news, we have cable news, we have business news, we have local news, and they have competitors in each of their spaces, and they're all being attacked from all fronts by people who aren't willing to invest in trying to get it right, and they're all being attacked by people who don't care. You know, don't care about fact-checking and don't care about whether it's right or wrong. And the credibility of CNBC is only as good as how right it is. And, you know, mistakes can move the stock market, and that's on us. You know, NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams is only as good as it is truthful, right, and accurate. And we all are being attacked by other forms of news and information that are both taking away viewers and are sometimes reporting correctly and sometimes reporting inaccurately. So that's how it affects me.
Yeah, but I just want to press you on that if I can,
Okay.
and then ask you to jump in, Craig. I mean, you watch Keith Olbermann, or you watch some of the stuff on your cable networks, the guy who helped create the Tea Party, for instance, on CNBC. They're pretty boisterous and pretty opinionated and often wrong.
Yeah. So I think.
Yes?
No,
You
I
said.
didn't agree with that. I said I understand your question. I understand what you're asking me. Look, I think that like any newspaper that has a news section and an editorial page, those cable networks have both their news programs and their editorial pages. So I think people understand what NBC Nightly News is, and they understand what the Today Show is, and they understand what Meet the Press is, and they also understand what Countdown with Keith Olbermann is. And there is a difference between all of those. And so there's room for all of them, just as there's room in the New York Times for news coverage and opinion. And I think that people are smart enough to understand the difference. The imprimatur that goes along with NBC Nightly News means something different than the imprimatur that comes along with being on MSNBC.
I'm increasingly optimistic about this area because I see some of the things that are emerging from the grassroots. For example, just on Twitter, a journalism guy at NYU, Jay Rosen, challenged Jake Tapper on ABC This Week, saying, hey, why don't you check the facts on what your guests say in as close to real time as possible. They hooked up with something called PolitiFact out of St. Petersburg's Times, and this is pretty good. This means we have people they're not perfect, but PolitiFact is pretty good, and they're actually checking what people, in particular, what politicians say.
On the Sunday morning ABC
On
show.
that one Sunday morning ABC show, it's a start. Also, I'm actually involved with Wikipedia, focusing on customer service for biographies of living persons, because there have been problems where disinformation made its way into there. And what they've announced very recently is something called pending changes. Specifically, if you got a bio, and this may apply to you guys, if you have a biography on Wikipedia and you think it might be attacked, you can have it protected in this way. I'm oversimplifying, by the way, but this means that normally in Wikipedia, if someone changes a page, that change goes public immediately. But if the page is protected, a reviewer has to take a look and do a smell test, see if that change is real, and only then will it be made public. Not perfect, it's an improvement, and it shows that people at the grassroots level are making things happen.
Jeff, let me ask you, draw on what you said earlier and ask you a broader philosophical question. Do you see a connection between the falsehoods that are sometimes perpetrated by bloggers and people who are just rushing out with information, half of it rumor and falsehood, let's say, and the cable bloviators who opine, oftentimes with very little information, and on your network as well as others?
You know, look, I think that, first of all, if you go back in American history, you know, and you look at, you know, the politics of when this country began and all of that, you know, slander and falsehoods and rumors have always been a part of society and politics and the like. You know, we always say, oh, this is the nastiest election ever. You know, we should go back and look at some of the early elections in this country. The big difference is that, you know, it often took days, weeks, and months for those falsehoods and those rumors and those innuendos to travel from, you know, Boston to Philadelphia. Today it happens in a second. So do I think that there's a connection between cable news and blogging? Look, I think that you know, certainly cable news is opinion. There's a lot of opinion in cable news today, and I think that that's widely understood. I think in the blogosphere world that we all live in today, it's only now becoming understood, you know, that anyone can have their own opinion, as opposed to the commentators on all of those cable news networks. And do I think there's a connection? I think that they do sometimes go hand in hand. I do think that they sometimes feed off of one another. I do think sometimes it's unfortunate. And I think that, you know, again, that's why credibility matters, and that's why imprimaturs, you know, there's the credibility of the New York Times or the Washington Post or NBC Nightly News, and I think you know what they stand for. And a lot of times you don't know what some of those other things stand for.
Simple message is that there's a problem. We can do better as a people, and we are doing better. We just need to do a lot more of it, and everyone gets to participate.
Let me ask you, Craig, if you were an investor, would you invest in a newspaper today?
I might invest in a convincing news organization. I'll put aside the semantics because I think the use of paper is too expensive. But the news organizations behind a newspaper, they're a pretty valuable resource for a democracy. We need to preserve journalism jobs, and we need to get people working with each other in networks to do that. Without going on at length, WNYC has On the Media. The show as of Friday talks a lot about this, and it's worth listening to. It's worth listening to on any week, but they address this subject directly and at length.
So you wouldn't invest in a print newspaper, but you might invest in a credible journalism organization.
Well, when I'm chatting with people who are doing philanthropy-based journalism, like ProPublica or the Bay Citizen, that kind of thing, remember, I speak to a lot of people who are doing news media about business models, and no one has the answer. The consensus right now is that people should try everything and see what happens. I'm particularly interested in the public model, including NPR, because right now they have things going, they're engaging the public in ways, and that actually means something. I'm seeing what happens. So far, I'm investing my time and, frankly, microscopic amounts of money. But the deal is to get everyone involved, because everyone here can do a little bit of a smell test when it regards news. When you get 1 million people doing that, that matters, and that's the direction that's happening already.
Jeff, a little known fact, or people who have read it maybe would remember, but Jeff started in the newspaper business. You were the editor of the Crimson, I believe, at Harvard. Would you invest in a newspaper?
No. I think that the newspaper model is broken, and in part because they used to rely on classifieds, and that really has gone away from newspapers. I think the newspaper model is broken. Now, I don't disagree with the view that you could invest in news organizations, but the problem is that economic model is really, really difficult right now, and there's not the economics of supporting a new news organization is tough, and that goes back to what my first answer to you was the thing that I worry about, and the biggest threat of the digital age is how are you going to afford, if the New York Times, which really is the only newspaper in the United States anyway right now, that is covering the world, okay? And so if we want to be informed in one place like that, how are they going to continue to be able to afford that if the economics of it continue to disintegrate?
That's right. You're under pressures that even a guy like me can see. Because I think you work for the Shine Hard Wig Company, and which is going to maybe taken over by Cabletown.
I think that we might need to explain a little bit of what you're
By the way, I'm a
referring
big fan of the show 30 Rock.
Right.
And I'm wondering why he's not Alec Baldwin.
Well, Alec was on this stage for a month in Equus in the last month here, but he's referring to the show 30 Rock.
It's not very funny, my joke, but it's the best I can do under pressure.
He's also referring to the fact that GE, which is Jeff's current employer, is sold the company to Comcast, which will become his new employer, which is the largest cable company.
Right.
Let me ask you another question. Speaking of, go back to the question of, you mentioned the evening news before and the credibility of Brian Williams, who's a wonderful anchor. Do you think the evening newscast is as good today as it was 15 years ago?
I do, and I think that this is something that people say a lot because it always was better before. I don't think that that's necessarily the case, and then I think what's thrown up a lot is, well, you've closed all these foreign bureaus and you don't cover as much international news. Look, I think that the evening news programs are incredibly strong. When they began, they were 15 minutes, and then they went to 30 minutes. So is it better that they're 30 minutes and not 15 minutes? I think these programs...
15 years ago, I asked.
Okay, well, 15 years ago, look, I do. I think that they've evolved, but I do think that they're still very pertinent. You have to remember, 15 years ago, the internet didn't exist. Cable news didn't exist like it does today. So people are informed all day. People are getting their news on the click of a button all day. So I think those evening news programs serve a slightly different purpose, and it's a little more contextual. It's a little more analysis. We don't, perhaps we don't cover the world the way we did, but I think we cover the world when it matters, where it matters. And I think the programs actually serve a very important purpose, and I think that they are as strong in a slightly different way than they were 15 years ago with different analysis and different context.
Craig, why do you suppose that the evening news has so relatively few young viewers?
Right now, from what I hear from the kids meaning anyone under 30, and I may expand it upwards shortly, But the deal is that...
I mean, you're only 31?
Well, exactly, yes. But they get their news, especially curated by each other. I see on Twitter, people are getting news from their peers, including some news professionals, and that's what they tend to trust. They also trust, and this is good news for the evening news, they trust the news organizations which do the best job of investigative reporting and fact-checking. I'm referring to the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, which literally does have the probably the most thorough fact-checking organization around. They get away with it because they've listened to Oscar Wilde, who said, if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you. And so at first it's ironic that a comedy show would deliver news, but unfortunately I remember Shakespeare class where the only guy who could really tell the boss the truth was the jester because he didn't have to be taken seriously.
Jeff, you're in the, I'm trying to go back to a serious question.
No, but listen, let me just follow up on that. I think that's an important point that, I mean, look, Saturday Night Live has been lampooning the news and doing the fake news for, 35 years and
had a big impact as president.
And that's my point, and continues to have a huge impact on society and had a huge impact on the last presidential election, for instance. And so I think there's room there's room for all of that. And so I think different age, different people are gonna get their news or their information from different places. The fact is, you go back to the evening news. I agree. Jon Stewart is a fantastic program. I think he's a brilliant talent, and he's got about a million viewers a night. The evening news is still reaching, Brian Williams, for instance, is still reaching 10 to 12 million people a night. So everybody's been predicting the death of the evening news for a long time.
But that 10 to 12 million is down considerably.
Well, it's actually, I mean, speaking for NBC now for a moment, it's been relatively steady for the last few years. The aggregate number of total viewers of the evening news programs across the networks is down. That's true. I mean, we've been a little more fortunate at NBC. But there's no question it's an older audience. My only point is that the beauty of I think, for instance, our organization is that we have so many outlets that we serve a lot of different viewers and a lot of different age groups. But there's no question the evening news is an older audience, and look, the younger audience isn't home at 6:30 at night. We live in a different society, and that's why local news begins at 4:30 in the morning now, when it used to begin at 6 a.m. There's a reason that these things evolve and change.
Let's move on, and so we can cover a broad range of media topics today. Jeff, you're in the, usually when we think about content, we think about narratives, be it on television.
Think about what?
Narratives.
Narratives.
Be it on television or movies or
Right.
books, whatever. But if I spend 2 hours a day on Facebook, is that content?
Is that content?
Yeah.
Well, it's a certain form of content, sure. But Facebook is a very specific thing because
If I spend 2 hours a day on Twitter or Google, am I engaging in
Google,
content?
Well, Google is accessing other people's content. But sure, there's content that they're aggregating there.
But if I'm doing that, I'm not spending 2 hours with NBC.
Well,
right?
Most people today are multitasking, and while they're searching for information or for a job or whatever, they're also either watching TV or listening to music or doing something else. So we live in an age where our kids are eye-chatting and watching TV at the same time.
But the question I'm driving towards is, does our definition of content in this digital age inevitably have to change?
Sure, of course, I think it does. But there's just different forms of content. That's all, and content is very all-encompassing. And I think social media, individual journalists, everybody is aggregating a certain form of content.
So how does social media, to pick up on what Jeff said, Craig, how does that change how media operates? You mentioned before that many of your friends are getting the stuff that they consume in news from Twitter or Facebook.
Yeah, from what I observe directly, and it's a very small sample and a biased view, I'm on Facebook and Twitter a fair amount, literally every day, looking at what people are saying, viewing some of the content they produce, sometimes viewing segments of what comes out in different forms of network or cable TV. It's all mixed together by the kids, and it's changed my viewing habits in some ways. I will view long-form TV, typically with TiVo. I also do look at it a lot online. I just mix and match continuously through the day, multitasking between work and sometimes recreational media. I see my girlfriend doing the same thing, and I've seen kids doing even more of it. I mean, I can multitask pretty well for a man in my declining years, but again, I can't multitask like a 15-year-old. How about you, Ken?
Multitask?
Yes.
No, I just do one thing at a time, including asking questions. So, Jeff, how do you and how does NBC and Universal Studios use social media?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we can't ignore it. Social media is here, it's here to stay, and it's changing the way people communicate with each other. You know, in the film business, in the last year, it's become very clear that there's something called the Twitter effect. And so it used to be that we could open a bad movie and you know, people wouldn't figure it out for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Today, they figure it out on day one because people go to that movie and they tweet it right away, or some other form of social media, and so that everybody knows. You can't hide it anymore. And so the Twitter effect has really had a real truthful effect on how good or bad a movie is.
But how can you tap into that?
Yeah,
in terms of marketing?
so that's just one example. But then we are tapping into and using social media. You know, many of our networks, and especially ones that are more geared towards younger viewers, Bravo, Oxygen kind of cable networks in particular, but we're also doing this at NBC, and we're also doing it, believe it or not, on things like the evening nightly news. Using social media, all the forms of social media that currently exist, to aggregate communities and like-minded viewers who might want to watch a program at the same time and have a community around that program with their friends or like-minded viewers. Will recommend a program to others. You know, that's very powerful in this day and age. I mean, the fact is, marketing can't exist today without social media, and it's probably the most powerful form of marketing. So we're taking advantage of all of that. And again, I think the hardest part is that you can't really fake the audience anymore.
As we spin forward and think about the future, there's a big debate, to go back to newspapers for a second. Many newspapers are talking about creating paywalls, which means if you
know, is accessing other people's content. So, you know, but sure, there's content that they're aggregating there.
But if I'm doing that, I'm not spending 2 hours with NBC.
Well,
right?
You know, most people today are multitasking, and while they're searching for information or for a job or you know, whatever, they're also, you know, either watching TV or listening to music or doing something else. So we live in an age where you know, our kids are eye-chatting and watching TV at the same time.
But the question I'm driving towards is, does our definition of content in this digital age inevitably have to change?
Sure, of course, I think it does. You know, but there's just different forms of content. That's all, and content is very all-encompassing, and you know, yeah, I think social media, individual journalists, everybody is aggregating a certain form of content.
So how does social media, to pick up on what Jeff said, Craig, how does that change how media operates? You mentioned before that many of your friends are getting the stuff that they consume in news from Twitter or Facebook.
Yeah, from what I observed directly, and it's a very a small sample and a biased view, I'm on Facebook and Twitter a fair amount, literally every day, looking at what people are saying, viewing some of the content they produce, sometimes viewing segments of what comes out in different forms of network or cable TV. It's all mixed together by the kids, and it's changed my viewing habits in some ways. I will view long-form TV, typically with TiVo. I also do look at it a lot online. I just mix and match continuously through the day, multitasking between work and sometimes recreational media. I see my girlfriend doing the same thing, and I've seen kids doing even more of it. I mean, I can multitask pretty well for a man in my declining years, but again, I can't multitask like a 15-year-old. How about you, Ken?
Multitask?
Yes.
No, I just do one thing at a time, including asking questions. So, Jeff, how do you and how does NBC and Universal Studios use social media?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we can't ignore it. Social media is here, it's here to stay, and it's changing the way people communicate with each other. You know, in the film business, in the last year, it's become very clear that there's something called the Twitter effect. And so it used to be that we could open a bad movie and you know, people wouldn't figure it out for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Today, they figure it out on day one because people go to that movie and they tweet it right away, or some other form of social media, and so that everybody knows. You can't hide it anymore. And so the Twitter effect has really had a real truthful effect on how good or bad a movie is.
But how can you tap into that?
Yeah,
in terms of marketing?
so that's just one example. But then we are tapping into and using social media. You know, many of our networks, and especially ones that are more geared towards younger viewers, Bravo, Oxygen kind of cable networks in particular, but we're also doing this at NBC, and we're also doing it, believe it or not, on things like the evening nightly news. Using social media, all the forms of social media that currently exist, to aggregate communities and like-minded viewers who might want to watch a program at the same time and have a community around that program with their friends or like-minded viewers. Will recommend a program to others. You know, that's very powerful in this day and age. I mean, the fact is, marketing can't exist today without social media, and it's probably the most powerful form of marketing. So we're taking advantage of all of that. And again, I think the hardest part is that you can't really fake the audience anymore.
As we spin forward and think about the future, there's a big debate, to go back to newspapers for a second. Many newspapers are talking about creating paywalls, which means if you read our newspaper online, the New York Times at the end of this year is going to start charging for it. The Wall Street Journal already does, the FT does, other newspapers, Newsday does. And what is your view of creating a paywall where you can't read newspapers unless you pay for them?
Yeah. My instincts tell me, without real knowledge, is that the paywall thing may not work out terribly well, since there's always going to be alternatives which are equally trustworthy. Again, the examples of publicly funded news, between NPR and ProPublica, Bay Citizen, others, there are going to be pretty good sources of news that actually I will pay for, because I can do that, and that model works. NPR as a model is only getting easier and easier for them because people trust what they see, and they're expanding pretty vigorously into social media and some new technologies.
Craig, I want to understand, though, your position. You started off by saying you don't think it'll work, and then you say you would pay for it. So
that's true. I would pay for a trustworthy source of news, and what I'm thinking I'm doing right now in a small way, and I think I'll do in a bigger way, personally speaking, is supporting NPR, again, ProPublica, Bay Citizen, that kind of thing, in part because I can also talk to them and see how they're building fact-checking into their basic operations.
But if they were charging a monthly subscription, you would pay or not pay?
I'm paying it now. The deal is I travel a bit, and I listen to NPR typically through streaming media on my notebook, and I figure if I'm going to make use of the service, I should send them something.
No, but you pay voluntarily.
Yes, and I like that model. My gut tells me people will do that, will pay voluntarily. I would like to be paying for Hulu right now. Hulu is basically network TV delivered online.
Started by this guy right there.
And I'm excited by it, and I'm happy to pay, except I don't want to see advertisements. And I don't want to put you on the spot with that. That's
What do
just
you mean
one
you don't want to put him
sample.
on the spot? Why are you so
Well,
polite?
it's your job. Well, I'm a nice guy.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. We can come back to Hulu in a minute. But first of all, I think you have to start from the premise that who said that the internet should be free? Okay? So, or content on the internet should be free. And so, you know, I actually support what the New York Times is about to do and the Wall Street Journal has done, gone back and forth on, but is doing, because, you know, again, you know, if the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the FT and other great journalistic organizations, which, with all due respect to all the ones that you named, are really much more far-flung and have much greater resources around the world to cover both the world and the country, they're just not going to be able to afford to continue to pay wonderful reporters like Ken Auletta to continue to report around the world if they're not behind a paywall. And so they're going to have to figure out a business model that gets them to a point that makes economic sense. So I think they're doing the right thing, and I think they have to do it if they're going to survive. And I think we want them and we need them in a democracy to survive. So that's one. With regard to Hulu, and let me just comment on that for a moment, Hulu is an aggregation site of broadcast network content. And we have what we call Hulu Classic, which basically is...
Just to describe, Hulu is, you can watch NBC shows, ABC shows, and Fox shows.
And many other networks, and not CBS, but and many other networks as well. But yes, that's right.
Please.
And it's been up for about 2.5 years. It's been a tremendous success. And it's been advertiser supported. So we actually we don't look at that as free. We actually look at it as advertiser supported, and it's been very successful. We are now offering a subscription service. We've just gone into a beta test on this, and beta phase, and where for a subscription you can get a much larger offering of content, deeper offering. There is advertising on there, but again, the reason that you would pay for the subscription is that the amount of content is just far greater than the just advertiser-supported model. Again, I go back to the idea that the idea that music was free, or music could be pirated, or that music could be just had for nothing, has really decimated the music industry. And I think that we're looking to ensure, again, just as news content is expensive, good narrative programming, great dramas is expensive to produce. And, somehow we have to continue to be able to afford that.
I agree in large part. Content creators need to be paid for what they do. Good news operations are expensive. They do cost money. Part of the discussion has been, it's made it a lot harder. There is a quote about information wanting to be free, which goes back about 15 years. The problem is that the quote is always misquoted, because it has a second part saying, it's like information wants to be free and also wants to be expensive. And so the people who originally said this some time ago got it right. But messages get distorted over time. Regarding the music business, my sense of things, what causes a lot of piracy is that people manage to justify to themselves because they feel that they're being overcharged for music. I'm not justifying that, but that seems to be the broad perception.
Well, the biggest problem with the music business, and I know we're not here to talk about the music business, but the biggest problem with the music business was that people were being forced to buy CDs of 12 to 15 songs when they only wanted one or two, and there were only one or two good ones on them. And so, you know, they had a point there. But being able to, you know, the music business was racked by piracy as a result of that, and technology. You know, look, there's been more technological change. There's been more technological change in the last 5 years than there was in the previous 50, and there will be more in the next 5 years than there probably was, you know, in all of civilization.
But that piracy issue that racked the music industry.
But it affects all content.
No, I understand, but that's my question. Do you see the same peril
100%.
with TV and movies?
Of course, 100%.
Even today?
100%. First of all, that's one of the reasons why we started Hulu, was because if we didn't, we thought that people would just steal our content. But just taking a step back from that, of course, I mean, piracy, I think, is one of the greatest threats, going back to your original question. Piracy is one of the greatest threats in this digital age. You know, because certainly the younger generation feels no compunction about going and finding that content. And if we can't be paid for it, then we're not going to be able to afford it. And I would say that the United States has made, as a government, has made strides in the last year on this front, but nowhere near as much as Britain and France, which have passed much better policy with regard to piracy. And I think that, you know, piracy is one of the biggest issues facing this country. It's not just about entertainment and content. You know, there's piracy of you know, national secrets. There's piracy of stealing how you make an airplane. There's piracy of tremendous amounts of goods that are produced in this country, and entertainment is one of them. And we need to do a better job.
Craig, on the point that Jeff made a moment ago about information shouldn't be free, you have to protect the copyright owner, and if you don't protect the businesses that are generating the content, then people won't be able to get that good content that you say you want. I have a sense that there's been a shift in the internet world, the digital world, a greater willingness to pay for content than was true, say, 5 years ago. When you see Google make a $125 million settlement with book publishers and the Authors Guild agreeing to pay for their content, when you see Google paying for content on YouTube, when you see iTunes and the success it's had with content, do you see a shift in the digital world saying that we need content and we're going to have to pay for it?
I don't see a shift because people on both sides of that issue, and there's more than two, I guess, but people have always been willing to pay. It's just that over time, the right people who need to talk to each other have drifted together to start getting together seriously to make things happen. There's a number of issues involved with governmental implications. There's the piracy issue. There's something called net neutrality, a tangent I won't get into. But the deal is that there are a lot of these areas where reasonable people can get together and make things work. A problem I've seen, now that I've spent some time in Washington, is that there are people who will try to pick a fight or provoke a fight between people on both sides because then they can get paid to consult on one side or the other. And I'm told it's actually much worse than I'm articulating, and I fear that I may be drawn into it in some areas, like net neutrality, since I used to be an engineer, and I don't have any emotional investment in the thing, or money investment. But the deal is that people are generally reasonable, and you get together people of goodwill without people who are trying to pick a fight, and you'll make great strides.
I think people, you know, I would say people are you know, I think about a bottle of water, okay? You know, we'll pay $2 today for a bottle of water. Think, you know, it's like, it's water, you know? You can go to, it's like, we now have no problem paying for...
Where'd you get the $2? I paid $3.
Exactly, okay, whatever. That's better marketing. But, you know, so for a bottle of plain water, I'm not talking about sparkly water or fancy water, just water. we'll pay, you'll pay $2, $3, you live in a more upscale neighborhood, so you'll pay $3. But, it's like, think about it. Like 10 years ago, the idea that you're going to pay $3 for like some water, it's crazy. That's nuts. So I think that times evolve and people become, it really comes back to marketing. You're paying $3 for that bottle of water because, it's been marketed to you and you accept it, and so you're now willing to do that. I think that's also a little bit of what's happening in the digital world, where people become more understanding and willing to pay for that content.
But then you get to use your $3 versus $2 bottle of water analogy. Here you are with Hulu, and it's a great service, and it's now free, and you're going to offer some premium, so
Sure.
you'll hopefully get another revenue stream from that. At the same time, your new owners, Comcast, and the cable industry believe in cable everywhere.
TV everywhere, yeah.
TV everywhere, and they have paid a hefty price for the programming they put on cable. Do you see Hulu in conflict with Comcast, and why not?
No, now you're getting into a little bit of a technical area, but no, I don't, because...
Technical?
Well, it's complicated. It's complicated, and also I don't want to go into this, but no, actually, I think there's a very simple answer, which is that most of the content that's available on Hulu is broadcast material. And for the reasons that you're citing, because so much of our business and our peers, the economic model of our cable networks is supported by those providers like Comcast, we haven't put much of the cable content online. We haven't put much of the cable content on Hulu. And so really Hulu, at its core, is a broadcast site. And so I don't think there's a tremendous amount of conflict, because we're very aware of that potential issue.
Yeah, I'm not paying attention to this one because I do love TV. I watch a fair amount of it. And like a lot of the kids, I'm wondering at what point will I not get cable TV anymore and just view TV online? It won't be soon. But even now, for example, when I'm traveling, I will pay typically on iTunes for a broadcast TV program so I can watch it, say, on the plane. Because even if the plane has Wi-Fi, I don't want to choke everyone else's access off watching video, because that would be bad manners. But all this is in the process of changing, and so I started to use a range of things. I'm using Netflix, for example, to watch old reruns of 30 Rock, and that helps me.
Do it on Hulu.
Well, again, that would suck up all that bandwidth. Of course, I'm doing that with Netflix also, but the idea is I'm already
industry. There is a question: will they be disrupted by digital downloads and big flat screen TVs in the homes? Do you think movie theaters have a future?
I do think movie theaters have a future in that they're social institutions. People go there to watch movies with other people. Even having strangers around sometimes adds something to that viewing experience, which we don't get when we're watching with a DVD or whatever at home. There's similar effects with bookstores and so on. Some of them are responding to that challenge by becoming cafes and bookstores. I want both movie theaters and bookstores to survive.
And apparently in California, there are movie theaters where you can actually have a meal.
Well, I know where you heard that.
Is that true? Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Yeah, I know. I think that's something that some people are experimenting with. I don't think it's a widespread thing at this point. But I completely agree that I think movie theaters do have a future, mostly because they are a communal experience, and I think that there are just certain types of movies that certainly should be viewed with people laughing around you and provide a different kind of experience. I think windows in the movie business are changing. Windows are what we mean by windows are how we roll out that movie, so you can watch it in the theater and then you can buy the DVD and then you can watch it pay-per-view.
There's a lag.
But there's a lag. You buy the DVD 4 months later, you can watch it on pay-per-view. A couple months later, you can watch it on HBO or a pay channel. So those windows are all changing. Digital is playing a role in that because of our ability to deliver that film in a different way. Having said that, I think that the communal experience in the initial exploitation of the film will remain.
But put your business hat on a second.
Yep.
I understand your sociology hat.
Yeah.
But if the digital world, if downloaded movies
Yeah.
and that window shrinks so that you can get the
Yep.
movie soon
Oh, no,
after
no,
it appears.
no question.
Okay. If I take away 30% of a movie theater's business, might I not drive them into bankruptcy?
No, I mean, because, you know, there's still, again, it goes back to a little bit of the Hulu conversation we were having before. I mean, there's different price points that all of that will be available at. And so there's still going to be room for the movie theater, and we still want the movie theater to exist. And so I just think it evolves, but I still think that the movie theater will exist and will have a role.
And bookstores? You believe that too?
I don't know about bookstores. I think that's you know, I was interested to hear that. You know, I don't know. You know, you go forward 10 years. I don't know what the future of bookstores. I'm not in that business, so I don't know it enough. I only can tell you from a personal experience, and I just don't know whether in 10 years whether they still exist.
What about Netflix in 10 years? Will they exist?
The DVD model, physical DVDs, are slowly disappearing as a way of distributing content as more and more people get broadband at home. Beyond that, Netflix as a distributor of content with broadband, I'm out of my depth here, but given that, I don't know how they could compete with the broadcast networks. I'm out of my depth, and yet I know the folks behind Netflix are pretty smart people, and they're planning for it. So beyond there, I'll defer.
Jeff, what about movie studios? How do they have to change in the future?
Yeah, well, I think, look, there's two issues with movie studios. You know, the cost structure of movies in a digital era is something that, again, it's no different than the entire conversation we've been having, and so that I think you have to be much more conscious of that, of the changing economics of the digital era, and so that will impact movie studios. And I think that movie studios, and you know, certainly Universal Pictures is a very important part of our company, has and must continue to embrace the digital era and the new digital means of distribution. And so we cannot just rely on the theatrical window, the movie theater. We cannot just rely on the DVD anymore. And so we have to embrace the new digital technology. So I think the two biggest issues for movie studios in the next 10 years will be the cost structure in the digital era and embracing that digital means of distribution.
We were talking earlier about journalism, and recently the Federal Trade Commission had hearings on what role, if any, government might play in helping subsidize journalism.
Yeah.
And they had people speaking on both sides of that fence. Do you think the government has any role or should play a bigger role in helping the journalism you want to see?
I don't know. My instincts are that it's pretty fraught because it could be started up with good intent, but then administrations come and go, and administrations with bad intent might put pressure on media organizations more than they have already to present one perspective of news. When I fantasize, I like the idea of local government enforcing laws regarding deceptive advertising when it comes to the news. But that's terribly fraught, so I don't see that going anywhere.
But for instance, earlier you cited NPR and public television. NPR gets very little money from the government. Obviously, public broadcasting gets a lot more. And you look at models in other countries like England with the BBC, they have actually a tax. Would you like to see that here?
Without having my thoughts examined, which should happen frequently, I think there's a lot of other bigger issues to look at first, and the government has a lot of other issues to work on first.
Do you think the government has any?
I don't. I don't think the government should be in the business of supporting journalism, because I think independent journalism is the key to democracy. But I think the government should be in the business of protecting the copyright of those journalists, and I think that is one thing that will that will allow journalism to survive. So I think that the government should spend more time thinking about piracy and intellectual property protection, but not getting into the business of making sure that newspapers survive.
Which you don't think they'll do.
Well,
In many cases.
Well, I think it's a business model that is in serious peril. I do.
You once used the phrase in talking about the digital world and why.
I think I did it with you at a breakfast, in fact.
You did.
Yeah.
But it was a nice phrase, actually.
It has lingered, that's for sure.
And the question. This was a public forum we were having at breakfast, and you said, in regard to selling NBC programs to say YouTube, you didn't want to exchange
Analog dollars for digital pennies.
Right.
And so, you and I probably did that, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years ago. I don't quite remember. And I've revised that since to say that we now had gotten up to digital dimes. And the problem is we really need to we need to get to digital quarters and beyond if we're going to really make any difference here. My point that I was trying to make to you at the time, and obviously it really struck a chord, I guess, is that it goes back to what we've been talking about all day here, which is that the business model behind the digital world is not mature, is not fully formed, and provides a real threat to all of our futures, because we're sending people to watch our programs online. We're sending our people to watch them through Hulu or Netflix or whatever you're doing, and the dollar of advertising that we used to get for that on NBC is now being replaced by dimes online, and that's not a trade that in the long run is sustainable.
All right, so let's pretend, for the sake of this discussion, that I am from YouTube, and YouTube, 40% of all the videos online are on YouTube. And Jeff, I want that large audience to be able to see 30 Rock and some of the other shows on NBC. I want to make a deal with you.
Mm-hmm. But there's so many great companies, whether it's Google or Facebook or or Yahoo or all of those companies, where I think that they will have a real role in how journalism evolves, and I think it would be interesting to work on that as well.
To the audience, I think we have a question back there. Please identify yourself.
Bert Flickinger. Let's return to how about you, Ken? Two questions. First on the nightly news, and then second for you, Ken, and Jeff and Craig. On the nightly news, I've probably done over 1,000 subject expert broadcasts on the consumer industry and economic forecasting. And to Craig's point, NPR, BBC will always say we want the four cornerstones. We want facts, figures, implications, and insights. Major network that's not Jeff's will constantly tell scores of experts, we want a 5 to 15 second soundbite, and that's it. So if you go back to Cronkite, Murrow, all the people you referenced, Ken, it just seems that the lack of viewers in the nightly news is because of lack of content. The second question is, do you think...
What's the first question?
That is what's your view? Jeff gave his view of whether the nightly news is better. What's your view?
And the second question?
Second question is, do you think the ad directors are causing a premature planned obsolescence of newspapers and magazines on something we're working on for the Wall Street Journal now, and going to Interpublic and Omnicom and everyone else? You ask the media buyers to invest in print media, you ask them to invest in magazines. They say it's much easier to do upfront network, it's much easier to do upfront cable. So the ad directors are doing a poor job selling the pages. The pages aren't purchased by the madmen at the advertising agencies. With fewer pages, you have fewer writers, you have less content. The magazines and the newspapers go into bankruptcy. And you're seeing that whether it's Procter & Gamble that won't do...
I got to be your editor now.
Yeah, that's it.
We got the question. That's a jump ball question for the panel, right?
There's one key corollary. Spanish-speaking media you've got the fastest growing consumer constituency in the country, and the ad directors and the corporations will not invest in Telemundo, Univision, Spanish-speaking media, El Diario. So our ad directors failing newspapers, magazines, and Spanish-speaking broadcast media?
I'll just quickly answer the first question and leave it to panel members to answer the second. I do not think the news is better, evening news is better today than it was 15 years ago, and for lots of reasons which would tax too much of your time for me to go through. The jump ball question, the second question.
He was going to take it. He told me.
I don't know because I don't know that business. Going back to the nightly news question, maybe I'm more sensitive to it now, but I would like people on TV news of any sort that if they have to bring on someone who they know is going to speak deceptively, if they should check the facts right away, like you see on The Daily Show.
But the question was, are the ad salespeople in television not doing a good job, essentially?
Or the ad salespeople in newspapers and
Right.
magazines.
Well, I think ad buyers are, look, I don't know that they've adapted as quickly as technology has changed, and technology has just has moved so fast, and I think it probably has taken the ad buying community a little time to catch up, taken them time to catch up with the growing explosion of Spanish language media. We own Telemundo. I wish that there was more money being spent there. I agree with that. So, look, I think that the ad buying media community is probably a little behind the technological change.
Yeah.
Question there? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was very influenced by TV, great reputation for fact-checking, and you guys do actually a pretty good job, and I'm not only sucking up. Maybe there's something
But you
in there.
are.
I am sucking up,
Right.
yes.
And I'm going to go to the next question
Yeah,
now.
and after all,
Yes.
you know Lisa and Tina.
Yes, sir.
Could you please comment on net neutrality and particularly Comcast's role in the recent suit against the FCC, please?
Well, I can't speak for Comcast. I mean, obviously.
Before you get bought by Comcast.
Well, net neutrality is a very difficult topic.
I mean, essentially, the net neutrality, just for definitional purpose in one sentence, it's basically, it says that anyone who goes online on broadband will pay the same rate whether you download movies or you just do email.
So let me speak on behalf of NBC Universal and where we are on that, and that there are different definitions of net neutrality, and there are different parts of this argument, but in the aggregate, we think it makes sense.
Actually, Ken's one-liner is pretty good on it, and as a nerd, I'm tempted to go further and won't. The deal is a difficult subject, but it's exactly the kind of issue where both sides are much closer than they know, because I've spoken to people going into a lot of organizations sideways, including talking to engineers, because when I was young, I was an engineer. The deal is that there are a lot of people in Washington who have deliberately picked fights, making the issue much tougher to deal with, and I have a feeling I'll be dragged into that one, and we'll try to find some way to make it funnier than it is. But the deal is, ultimately, the issue is about fairness. We'll see how it plays out. There are some really good people at the FCC on it.
Way in the back. Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon?
There's 2 mics.
Oh, 2 mics. This gentleman here and then that gentleman. Yes.
The largest
It's
criticism.
a very unruly order. No one wants to tell their name, right?
Excuse me. My name is Norton Garfinkel.
Thank you.
The largest criticism of cable news in particular and television news in addition has not been on the issue of fact-checking, but has been the tendency to go toward the entertainment value of 2 people arguing against each other, usually with inaccuracies on both sides. Do you see a difference as we move toward digital news? I don't mean visual digital news, but digital news, that entertainment aspect, that interest in argument on two sides will change, or will it be the same?
Well, you know, I think that one of the reasons that cable news moved to that, you know, 15 years ago, I mean, Crossfire was one of the precursors to the whole point-counterpoint argument, and the way that stories were presented in television news and cable news was to be heard above the fray, because there is so much out there, and that one of the beliefs was that in order to cut through and in order to be heard, you had to be entertaining or you had to be loud. I still think that exists today. There are more choices today than ever, and one of the ways that people are heard, even in the digital age, is to throw out crazy things and just see where it sticks. And I think this is one of the issues in the digital world, is that, you know, you can throw out anything and that unfortunately it does stick. And so I think that there's a continuing tendency to do that.
Tell the story you was telling it in the green room before about last week you were in Sun Valley.
Yeah, I was in Sun Valley last week at a media conference that Ken was at, and I was walking by this gaggle of reporters who were gathered outside, and they shouted a question to me, and you know, they shouted, "How's the Comcast deal going?" And I said, you know, everything's on track, and, you know, looks like it'll close at the end of the year. And so one of those reporters tweeted it immediately, and back in our office in New York, somebody saw the tweet, and it was literally within 30 seconds of me saying it, and had emailed me back and said, I see that you just told the reporters that the Comcast deal is going to close by the end of the year. And I said, I just said that not 30 seconds ago. And it had been communicated from Sun Valley to New York and back to me, and I'm going, we live in a crazy world. You know, I mean, it's just amazing.
We had that gentleman in the back, yes.
Hi, my name is Larry Brown. I only came here to get Ken Auletta to sign my book, Googled, or what's left of it, because it's like falling apart. I've read it so much.
Wow.
Except
Wow.
that the spine is broken, but I got a
you
lot more
sucked
than
up
my...
well, I will sign it, yes.
I got a lot more than my... Ken and I worked on a project but many years ago, before he became Ken Auletta. And I feel a little bit like that great Steven Spielberg line. Steven Spielberg's mother had this great line. She said, if I had known he was the Steven Spielberg, I would have been much nicer to him.
All right, I'm going to be your editor, too. What's the question?
The question is, what do you guys actually think news is? And the reason I'm thinking this, I once had a bunch of lunches with Steve Friedman when he was running the Today Show, and I said, what do you think news is? He says, same stories, different names. And it's like, most news isn't news to me. You know, and I started out in this business, and I've had a very successful career, you know, in the advertising and media. And because I lucked into a book called Understanding Media, and Ken is the rightful successor to Marshall McLuhan, in my opinion. Oh, really? This book, Googled, should be, I think, assigned reading in every first grade class in the country.
But you want to know, the question is...
The question is, what do you think news is, and why should anybody watch what's called a newscast when so little is news to anybody? What McLuhan said was, news, as it is popularly considered, no longer exists, because everything that you're hearing about is already developed to such an extent that it's just a minor nuance.
So, Craig, what is news?
Well, first, that sucking up was a little excessive, but again...
And coming from him, that's saying something.
That's from a grassroots, plain language take. News is just what's going on. And all of us have to decide as individuals what's going on and select it.
But when you were talking about fact-checking, it's not just what's going on, is it accurately reporting what's going on?
I
right?
would personally like it to be fact-checked and so on, but in its most basic terms, it's what's going on, and then selected by other people typically, and that, of course, introduces selection bias in there. But I like to keep things simple.
I think that's well said. Questions? Yes. Yes, ma'am. Right? Yes.
Hi.
Just wait for the...
Hi, my name's Rich Benjamin, and I'm a writer. And my question is, first comment though, I appreciate what you said about people curating the news through Facebook. And a lot of people I know don't have the same high opinion of the New York Times that you guys do. I think its opinion page is very predictable. So the question is, with Newsweek going out of business, what do you guys, this is mainly for Ken, what do you guys think will be the business model for magazines transitioning to new media? And then what opinion and analysis sites do you read? What do you guys think are the good, not just news, but the opinion and analysis?
I'll just give a quick answer, and then I'll turn to panel members. I think news weeklies, it's very hard to, in the future, for them to survive. I mean, the problem is it's stale news in this internet age. And I think that John Meacham tried, as the editor of Newsweek, to make it more like The Economist, which is a successful model, but it did not, either he wasn't given enough time or it just didn't catch on like Friday Night Lights hasn't with a big audience. So I think news weeklies are very challenged to survive in the future, as probably are many business magazines.
I concur with that.
I agree, and if it matters, for example, when I read about politics, I'll read Tagan Goddard's Political Wire, since he's curating news from many political sources and getting it out there. I have a strong fondness for Huffington Post, since they're trying to figure out just what is the future of news delivery and so on, and talking about things like that phrase I used before about the immune system of democracy. I'll read a number of other sources. On Twitter, for example, I subscribe to the feeds of Newt Gingrich, stuff like that, trying to get multiple points of view simultaneously.
Do you suck up to him too?
Not particularly, because he's so far away for one thing, and you're so much more attractive.
All right, next question.
Wow.
Yes, ma'am. Right in the front. Just wait for the microphone. Nice you with the hat, Lynn.
Sorry, Jeff. 10 million viewers is a lot of viewers. You're still making money on the evening news. It's a heck of a lot less than you or anybody had 15, 20 years ago. My kids aren't watching the evening news, and I would even wager that yours are not. How long does it exist, and how does it exist without an audience?
Right. Well, I think it's different at different places, and I think that you know, we're a little bit more fortunate than our peers in our business model because we have cable networks, cable news networks that help support it. But there's no question that you know, it's probably not a 20-year game.
But just to be sure, I want to interpret what you just said. You don't think the evening news will exist in 20 years?
No, I don't know, but I think that, you know, it's you know, I think all of Lynn's points are well taken, which is that it's an older audience, and it's over time those audiences are going to continue to diminish. You know, so, but I do think, first of all, I do think that the next 10 to 20 years is an eternity in this business, and so that I think that certainly at NBC, which is all I can speak for, the nightly news has a very good future, at least for the next 2 decades. Beyond that, and at other places, I'm not so sure.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name's Frank Vogel. An ethical question. Should companies in the media accept censorship by China because it makes business sense? Or should they decide that there is a line in the sand where their integrity and the audience trust of them as sources of information and news demands that they say to authoritarian regimes, we will not go along with your censorship even if we lose business?
Well, I don't think we should accept censorship by anyone or any government, and I don't, you know, and I don't think China should be an exception to that.
I don't know how the Chinese people feel, and I mean the people rather than the government. It's a culture I don't know, so I'd have to ask them.
Yes, all the way in the back.
Hi, my name's Ted Cleary. I just had a quick question about education, how you think, you know, new forms of media are going to change how we educate, you know, our population.
Yeah, you know, I think that's a really good question, actually. because I think education in this country is going to change a lot over the next, 10, 20 years. And digital technology and means of distribution of information and educational materials, are our kids going to even need to go away to college? Now, by the way, I think there's advantages to the social interaction of, it's like going to a movie theater. So I think there are advantages, but I do think that, it's going to evolve. I think it's going to change. I think it actually opens up tremendous opportunities to those who haven't had it. You think about rural and less wealthy communities. I think digital technology is going to change our view of education in this country, and I think that's a positive thing.
I don't know much about education. I do know that broadband and
you know a lot more about a lot of things than you're willing to say.
Well, now you're sucking up. But
I'm not. That's a fact.
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of people who know a lot about education as it's evolving, so I'll defer to them. I do know that at least if we're going to provide a level playing field, that means getting technology and broadband out to areas which are currently underserved in some forms. And also just to help out schools, so like through Donors Choose, which is a kind of microfinance for schools across this country, you can do things like helping fund classroom projects and their technology, and just you could help push for these different technologies to reach into underserved communities. For example, given my cell phone service, I found that one underserved community is East Hampton.
Let me just mention one fact which is really fascinating, and I know we're running short of time. If you go to some third world countries which don't have cable, can't afford the infrastructure, don't have broadband, but they have cell phone service, which is inexpensive, they can't afford textbooks. Students in some of these schools, in some of these African nations, for instance, are using Google search as their textbook. It's quite extraordinary. So that's just a wonderful example of how digital technology advances education. I've been told that the witching hour is here. I want to thank our two guests, and thank you.
Folks, I just want to thank the Tar family and our co-sponsors one more time, Mickey Strauss and Ellen Chesler, for organizing this. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
One question. These are very difficult times in terms of the economy, and when you talk of FDR, he led us through the Great Depression, and all of those were the worst of times. Are you hopeful about where we're going as a country and as a nation?
Yeah, I am hopeful. I mean, we as a people are a very resilient population. We are an enormously inclusive population, but we're at a point where I think we have lost sight of what the proper balance between a thriving democracy and a thriving economy, where that balance is, and I think we're coming to terms with that right now. We're coming to terms with what it would mean for our democracy to be a bit more vibrant, and by that, making government a bit more vibrant and doing the good work for the American people that, frankly, we saw a function of the New Deal back during the Roosevelt presidency. And I think there's an awful lot of people discouraged right now about where are the jobs going to come from, how are they going to hold on to their homes. The conversations we've had over the course of this weekend, I think, suggest that there's hope, there's optimism, but it's going to take serious leadership, and it's going to take making some people probably a little angry along the way and getting through some fights and some difficult conversations. I think the country is up for it, and I think it's going to be what we can look forward to for about the next year.
If our viewers are interested in knowing more about the Roosevelt Institute, how can they find out?
We'd love for them to come to find out more about us. We're based in New York City, offices in Washington and up in Hyde Park, and our website address is www.rooseveltinstitute.org.
Look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
watching WVVH-TV, Hamptons Television.